Welcome to Garden Wise Adventures. My name is Malie, and today is another beautiful day. I live in Utah, Zone 6/7, and it is actually time to start planting my fall gardens. This is the very last week in July, and I like to plant my fall vegetables anywhere between the end of July and the first week in August. That gives them time to mature before the really cold weather sets in. Now, my first frost date is somewhere in the middle of October. We could have it as early as the end of September or as late as mid-October. Maybe October 1st is a good date to just kind of keep in mind for my area. Now, I started my seeds indoors, and I think it was the middle of June. So I have 6-week-old plants that are ready to put in the ground. Now, I will link a video up above that shows you how I start my seeds. And I would have done a video back then, but I was just too busy and didn't think about it. I'd done so many seed starting videos that I didn't know if that would be helpful. But now that I think about it, it would have been helpful to just give you a mark to know a date when to start your seeds. But anyway, I do have cabbage starts. There is a possibility if you go to some nurseries, call around and see if they have cabbages and kohlrabi this time of year, maybe some kale or Swiss chard. If they do, those are the perfect vegetables to plant. So let me show you my plants. Let's tell you what you can plant in the fall in my area. Like I said, Zone 6/7. And then we'll show you what I do to prepare the beds. So I have 3 empty beds right now. And when you're doing succession gardening, which means planting several times a year, you need to start your gardens with a plan in mind for your succession growing. Now, I have this empty bed. It's all covered up with everything, but I also have an empty container right there. That's also that's attached to my drip irrigation. We've got some shade cloth because it's still really hot, and the plants that we're going to plant do not like the hot weather, but the shade cloth will make a perfect environment for them. It will also protect them from the cabbage moths that are just so prevalent this time of year. We have them flying around all over. But what I'm going to plant is cabbage. Got some kohlrabi. I'm going to do 6 cabbage and 3 kohlrabi in 2 of the beds. And then we've got some red cabbage that we're going to put in the containers. And I really tried hard, but I was only able to get 1 spinach to germinate. This is a giant spinach, a winter giant I think it's called. So we're going to plant that winter giant spinach also. This is my second bed that's empty. We're going to plant seeds in here. We're going to do carrots and beets. This is a good time of year in our area to plant carrots and beets. And then up here where my onions and dill were, I harvested all of that and cleaned out this bed and prepared it, got it ready. And we're going to plant a different kind of cabbage, and I wish I could remember the names of them, but I can't. I know the one down in the bottom bed is going to be Early Jersey Wakefield. Then we've got 3 kohlrabis, and then these are like Glory of something. I wish I could remember the name, but they're a different kind of cabbage. We're going to leave the fennel in this bed. Now, I've already finished preparing this bed and this bed. And I prepared this container. You can see the drip irrigation in it for one of the purple cabbages. We're not going to shade this one because it's actually behind my sunflower, and the sunflower provides a good decent amount of shade. Gets enough sun that the cabbage should grow just fine, but it's going to shade it from the extreme heat. And in just a little bit, I'm going to show you how I prepare my beds by preparing this bed for planting. Now, before we prepare our beds, I wanted to talk a little bit more about what can be planted in the garden for fall in August in Utah. And there's a lot of different things that you can plant. I basically concentrate on cabbages and kohlrabi. You could probably do cauliflower. I've done it many years in the past, and I've never gotten cauliflower to produce in the fall. I think they're very temperature sensitive. They form their flower heads at a certain temperature, and I've never been able to hit the timing right here in Utah. Now, if you've been able to plant cauliflower and get it to form a head in the fall, I would love to know the time of year that you do it, especially in northern Utah. Now, other things that you can plant that I'm not going to plant because I already have a ton of them and they're going to last all the way through winter are kales and chards. So kale and chard, this is the perfect time of year to plant them, and they will actually overwinter if you give them just a little bit of cover. They don't grow over the winter, but they will sit there and you can harvest off of them. Spinach is another excellent one. Lettuces is another good one. I would wait a little bit longer for the lettuce because it's really, really hot right now and your lettuce might bolt rather than forming leafy greens. Now, I'm not an expert on lettuce because I just basically let my lettuce self-seed and it comes in the spring, and I haven't planted lettuce in many years. But from what I've heard, there are summer hardy lettuces that if you do your research, maybe there are some that you could plant this time of year in Utah. The other things, like I said, are the carrots and the beets. This is a really good time of year to plant them, but when we plant those, we're going to show you what we need to do for those because we are still in summer and we still are in the heat. Now in Utah, at least in my area, the nights will start to cool off a little bit in August, but we stay in the upper 90s all the way through probably the last week in August. But once we hit September, that's when it starts to cool down and it turns beautiful. Fall is absolutely gorgeous here. So you need to keep that in mind as you're planting vegetables here in Utah. The other thing that happens are the days start to shorten pretty rapidly. By November, obviously, the time changes and it's dark by 5 o'clock. Right now it's staying light and I can be outdoors till about 9. So as the day lengths shorten, your plants grow slower. So you do need to give them enough time to be able to grow to full maturity before the days shorten and the growth starts to slow too much. So anyway, let's show you how we're going to prepare this bed and then we're going to plant our fall vegetables. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take my irrigation and I'm going to move it out of the way. Now, when my irrigation was first installed, it was installed by a contractor who had this brilliant idea of making an irrigation system, a drip irrigation system that I could just move out of the way when it's time to prepare the beds and plant. So we're just going to pull this back. Now that that's pulled back, we're going to rake out the old mulch. So let's get that raked out. We're going to keep the old mulch so that we can actually reuse it. This is a mixture of straw and grass, that I mowed from my yard. And if you'll notice, it hasn't broken down as much as you would think it would. This was applied early this spring in March. And it's broken down, but it hasn't broken down as much as I would have hoped. But it's because we have very dry weather here. If we had more moisture, this probably would have broken down enough that I could mix it into the soil. I'm just going to put this on top and put a fresh layer on top of this rather than mix it into the soil. I could mix this into the soil, but I would have had to think about that a lot earlier and then kept this bed pretty moist to have it break down. As straw and grass breaks down in the ground, it's going to tie up the nitrogen for a little while, and we don't want the nitrogen tied up when we're going to be planting plants that need to grow as fast as possible. Now that the mulch is moved out of the way, I'm going to throw down some of this Espoma plant tone. Now, it's always best to know what your plants need before you put fertilizer down. I've had my beds tested before. They test high in phosphorus and potassium, but I have not added phosphorus or potassium in these beds for quite a while, and this has been heavily intensively grown both in the winter, summer, and spring. So this bed, I think, is pretty depleted, so we're going to be adding fertilizer and compost to it. So we're just going to add a little bit of this. This is a 5-3-3. The first number is nitrogen, so it's more nitrogen than phosphorus and potassium. Then we're going to put down some blood meal to add some extra nitrogen because I know it's deficient in nitrogen. Now my nitrogen source is going to be blood meal. This is another organic source. You can, for a very quick fix, you can put lawn fertilizer as long as you use the type that is just nitrogen and does not contain weed and feed. Lawn fertilizer is a very quick fix. It will give you a lot of nitrogen very quickly, and actually a lot of the market farmers will use that when their beds are low in nitrogen. But I'm going to use blood meal because that is what I have, and that's actually what I like to use. Now blood meal is going to be bioavailable faster than some of the other organic products. The difference between organic and synthetic fertilizers is that the organic fertilizers are not in the form that the plants can use, and it takes them quite a long time to break down. Now I've added blood meal and Espoma garden tone and compost to these beds every year. So the nitrogen that's available in the beds at this point is going to be nitrogen that I applied maybe earlier this spring. So I like to apply my blood meal at least twice a year just to make sure I have a constant source of nitrogen. The synthetic fertilizers, the nitrogen is in the form that the plants can already use. That's why it's a quick fix. Now I do have to say that neither the synthetic nor the organic nitrogen sources are going to build up salts in the soil. Neither one is going to destroy the soil biome unless you use too much of both varieties. Too much fertilizer, no matter what the source, is going to be a problem. Now for adding compost, I really actually like to add my own compost, and in the fall I do that. I'll add my own homemade compost to as many beds as I have compost available. But I don't have any of that available right now, so what I'm going to use is the Espoma Organic Land and Sea Compost. I'm not an affiliate of Espoma brands, but those brands, maybe I've been swayed by Laura from Garden Answer, I don't know, but I really do like their products. So that's what we're going to use in this bed. Now we're going to spread this out with my rake, and I'm going to show you how much compost I've added, because just like too much fertilizer, too much compost can also cause a problem. We're only going to add a skiff over the top. So this is what my garden bed looks like before I mix the compost in. It's just a skiff over the top. It's going to be enough to give it a little more organic matter, and it's going to be enough to just give it a little bit of a boost. So let's talk about dig or no dig. Now I am definitely a proponent of disturbing soils as little as possible, but there are times where you do need to dig into your soils. Number one, when you plant, you're obviously going to be digging, and number two, I like to incorporate the organic matter into my soils. I have been on this property for 15 years, and what I've noticed is the myth that seems to be perpetuated that the earthworms are going to take your compost all the way down to the bottom of the soil profile doesn't happen, at least here. Our summers are too dry, our soil stays dry, and when I dig into these beds and get to the bottom, even though these beds have been here for 15 years and I have put nothing but compost and peat moss and everything in them, the soil underneath is only changed about that far down. Everything underneath that is the same as it's always been. Now, it's not that it's unhealthy soil, it's just that the earthworms are not mixing the compost in. Now, I would prefer to mix it in because when I refurbish my beds, I put in peat moss, compost, and vermiculite. But I would like the compost and the fertilizer to be mixed down where the roots of the plants are going to be. So that's the next thing that we're going to do. We're not going to till it. We're not going to destroy the soil structure very much. We're just going to loosen the soil and allow the compost to drop down in. So I like to take my trusty digging fork, avoid any of my hoses that are already in there. This bed already has rocks in it and roots from the grapes. See, and this is another reason to dig. I'm finding that since my beds have been in ground for so long, that they are starting to get overtaken by roots. I think there's grape roots, there's tree roots, there's all sorts of roots that infiltrate the beds. I'm not going to dig the roots out of this bed right now. I may do that in the fall or early next spring. So right now, all we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the compost and the fertilizer is incorporated. Now we're going to smooth it out. Then we're going to pull the irrigation back down. I'll stick that in a minute. But this bed is ready for planting now. Now we're going to be refurbishing this container. This container had my shallots in it earlier. What we're going to do is we're just going to pull back. So we've got the irrigation pulled back. We're going to pull out some of this mulch. And then this right here is just basically my potting soil mix that I have. So we're just going to pour some of that in here. Don't want it too full. And then I'm going to mix that in, and that's ready to go. Now we've given these a lot of space. I want them to have enough space to grow as big as they possibly can. We'll probably even space the kohlrabi out a little bit more. Let's move that one over here. And we'll move that one over. So it's ready to plant. Let's get planting. Now I've done a lot of planting videos, and planting is the same for just about all plants. So what we're going to do is we're going to tip this over. We're going to look at the roots. It's a nicely developed root system. There's not any circling roots because this is still a young plant. We started it in a small 6-pack and then upgraded it to a 4-inch pot. So now it's ready to go into the ground. To plant it in ground, we're basically just going to dig a hole big enough for the plant, make sure that it's the same level as it was in the pot, and tuck it in. And then after we're all done planting, we're going to mulch and water it in. Now they're all covered. The straw is going to hold in moisture and keep the soil cool. Now we're going to cover this whole small tunnel with shade cloth just to keep them cooler. Now we've got the shade cloth up. These are ready to go. I'm really excited. Now for the first container. We're going to plant 2 cabbages in this container. And then we're going to mulch with straw for the same reasons as we did in the beds. And then we're going to cover this with shade cloth also. Finished. Now we are losing light. I'm a end of the day, not early morning type of person, so we're going to show you one more bed and how we're going to plant the carrots and the beets. Now carrots and beets are root crops, so they're going to be handled a little differently. What I'm going to do is rough up the soil a little bit, just toss some seeds down, pat it down so that they get good contact with the soil, and then cover it with a burlap sack. Now we're going to do 1/2 of the bed in Detroit dark red beets. And then I will just thin these as they germinate. Sometimes I have issues with germination this time of year, so I just like to spread them as evenly as possible. Mess it up and pat them into the soil. And then we're not going to mulch this with straw. Like I said, we're going to cover this with a burlap bag until we start seeing germination. Then we'll take the burlap off. And we'll be watering these every day. Now I know in earlier videos I said that I'm not going to be planting all the specialty carrots, but I have a bunch of seeds left over. There's Cosmic Purple by Baker Seed. There's Short and Sweet. I think this is the one that did the best in my other bed. We've got Uzbek, which is a yellow one. New Kuroda, which is also a Baker Creek. Nantes Half Long. Oh, and here's some more beets that I'm going to put in. This is just a mixed color beets. We're going to use up all of these packets, and we're just going to mix them all together. We're just going to spread these as evenly as possible across the bed. Try not to hit where we had the beets. Pat them down. Water them in really well. Use this wonderful piece of burlap that I rescued from church functions. They weren't going to be using it anymore, so I've adopted them for my garden use. And they are amazing. Then we're going to water the burlap down really well. And this is just going to help shade the soil and keep it warm. Then we're going to put the shade cloth over the top of this also. Now it's almost too dark to see, but there it is. Now that's all that I had time to film because as you can see it's almost completely dark. I'll finish the rest tomorrow, but hopefully this is helpful for you. Now I would love to hear what you're planting this time of year if you're planting for the fall, and I hope you go have a wonderful garden adventure.